Welcome to today's podcast episode of Little by Little Homeschool. I am excited to be joined today by Jenn Lormand from Tighten Your Tinkler. Thank you for being here today, Jenn.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee.
Absolutely. So in a moment, I'm going to have you just share a little bit about yourself, and so we can kind of figure out, who we're listening to is going to tell us some information. But I'm going to give a little disclaimer here. If you are listening, as a listener, if you have this on, maybe just playing it out loud, I would encourage you to maybe pop your earbuds in. This is going to be rated G. Nothing inappropriate is going to be talked about here, but maybe you want to give a listen and then go through, think about it, and be able then filter this information to your children. We don't want to be saying anything that maybe you don't want your kids to suddenly hear, because we're going to be talking from an adult perspective, from a mother perspective today. So with that disclaimer, welcome, Jenn, and can you share a little bit about yourself?
Thanks so much for having me. Yes, my name is Jenn Lormand. I am a mom of 3 boys. I'm an exercise physiologist, and my business partner, Christina Walsh, and myself are the co-creators of Tighten Your Tinkler. And I really started doing this type of work from really my own personal journey with pelvic floor dysfunction and pelvic organ prolapse that was diagnosed after my 3rd son was born. And this conversation that we're going to have today is really a look at all of the information that Christina and I have gathered over the years of our research and talking with so many women. What were the things that we wish we knew ahead of time that contributed to these issues, that contributed to pelvic organ prolapse for me? And what were the things that I wish my mom would have told me about when I was younger that might have changed my trajectory and path and not had to deal with these issues?
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to focus today. I know you work a lot with moms, but since this is a homeschool podcast, we talk a lot about how we can share so much with our kids and how we have this opportunity with them being home that we don't just have to focus on the math and the writing and the spelling. We can approach everything we want to teach them and talk about with them. So we focused a bit on how we can talk to our daughters. Now, if the conversations that we're about to have are not ones of a mother's not already talking about this kind of stuff with her daughter, how do you recommend that she introduces this to open the communication so that when the daughter has questions, she comes to mom first?
Yeah, well, first thing I would say for sure is pray about what is the right time. All of our children are different in terms of maturity levels and sensitivities to certain things. I mean, I have 3 boys and they are all completely different. So prayer and discernment about when is the right time, I say, is the definite first step. Secondly, there are some great resources out there, some great books out there that you could purchase and perhaps go through a little bit at a time. Obviously look through that resource first, but then you could introduce it in that way where you're really just educating your daughter about her body from a very young age. Part of what society has done is we no longer call our body parts by their names. And I think it's really important from a young age, with all of my boys, they learned the proper anatomical terms of what their body parts were. So we didn't call it a pee-pee or a wee-wee. We called it a penis. Girls have a vagina. And I think that's really important. And the research shows that when you do teach your children the right anatomy, that they're less likely to deal with some of the problems of the world with sexual abuse and all of these types of things. So I do think, starting at a young age doing that is really important. One of the books that many Christian moms have told me is great. I have 3 boys, so admittedly, I have not purchased either of these resources, but I have talked to women who have. One is It's Great to Be a Girl, and the other one is The Care and Keeping of You. And I've heard really wonderful things about both of those books, about learning about their body, creating positive body images for our girls, and teaching them to not be afraid. There's nothing wrong with our private parts. They're actually, what we want to celebrate these changes that happen for us as we grow and mature. So we don't want girls to feel like this is a burden or that this is scary when their bodies begin to change.
I've discussed this before in the past. I had wonderful upbringing, but it was just during a time where I don't think it was common to talk openly about this kind of stuff. And being really embarrassed when my mom would, because I was a bit older. And so I came into parenthood like, I don't want to be like that. I want to have these conversations with my kids. And it was more uncomfortable for me than it was for my children, because they didn't have that preconceived, like, oh, this is, stuff we're not supposed to talk about, taboo, or we're supposed to, this is behind closed doors, or they didn't have that. So they were just kind of like, why is mom giggling? Why is she turning all red? But the more that I have those conversations, the less awkward it feels for me. And so now with having a 22, 20, and 17-year-old, it's not awkward to me at all. I'll talk to the boys about anything. I'll talk to the girls about anything. And it's important that we are the voices that are speaking into them, especially as they get older. Yes. My kids can have access to and hear voices of all kinds of things. And when I hear rumblings of things in the culture, and I'll start talking to them about it so that they hear where it's coming from me as well. And so they're not getting it just from somewhere else. And I know, I guess, statistically, they say that the first introduction of something is kind of gets stuck in a child's mind.
Yes.
And that way we don't have to undo that if we're having these conversations. So if you're a little nervous and stuff, don't be. And I'm seeing that now. I'm a Gen X here, so I'm a little bit older than most of the people that are listening. So I know that it is changing with the younger generations. And I so appreciate that. And so I know you're kind of talking a little bit about, how we have to use correct anatomical terms and that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you, we didn't start off like that with my kids, because that's not how I grew up. But then I started to hear this and I started to change, and they didn't really bat an eye when I changed the terminology and started using the proper words for it. I was just like, well, actually it's called this, not this. And we just kind of shifted. And kids, I feel like kids is like water off a duck's back. They don't really, it's not as big a deal to them. We make it a bigger deal. But let's talk a bit about the pelvic floor. And we know that all humans are born with a pelvic floor. We use it daily, starting with our very first diaper. So why do we treat this part of the body like a mysterious zone that only appears when it's time to give birth? It's there all of our life.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm not really sure why it is that we treat this muscle group differently than other muscle groups, other than I think it got roped into issues. The only time that pelvic floors are really talked about is, even in the medical field, is really post-birth when there are issues there. But we still haven't caught up with, okay, just like we talk about the other skeletal muscles in our body, like our biceps and our quads. We haven't quite caught up in terms of, okay, being proactive and teaching about, like, your pelvic floor is super important. It literally holds your guts up and in. With our other major organs, we have bone that protects and holds those organs in place. Your pelvic floor really does, it's all soft tissue down there. There is no bone that is at the bottom of the pelvis holding this stuff up and in. So it is really important. And it's also important that we talk about your pelvic floor doesn't work in isolation. So it works with a bunch of other foundational muscles. And when we strengthen these muscles properly, our bodies work so much better. And so, it is a mystery in terms of why we've decided to treat the pelvic floor, as we like to say, a special unicorn, because while it is special, it isn't that special. It's just like every other skeletal muscle in your body. And it's important that we functionally train it like we do the other muscles in your body.
It's a very important point. And to be honest, I never even thought about a pelvic floor. I'm sure that they might have talked about it when I was pregnant and with kids having babies, but otherwise it's not been something until I started running into it more online in the past couple of years, and started thinking, a lot of these terms that I know you use in your program, I had no idea about them, probably mostly because I didn't have any extreme circumstances. So like you're saying, you probably hear about it when you go to the doctor because you're having some issues. And so you go to them and you tell them, like, oh, it's probably because of this. And we're not taught how to be proactive. And I think there's a lot of talk about being proactive nowadays, which I celebrate that.
Yes. Because there are some proactive things that we can do to take care of this. And I'm excited to dive into that, because I do think that information is life-changing for both moms and their daughters.
Yeah. Imagine knowing this. I just feel like this generation that's growing up, imagine knowing this. And my daughter's 22, so I might have missed the boat a little bit, but still we have that open communication. So I can start talking to her about this now. And as I've been learning, I've been talking to my husband about things. He's like, I don't know. So, we have to remember men also have this. I mean, we still all have same organs and different organs. And yeah, I guess it's just been a part of the conversation, I think, because of the sexual organs that are there, possibly because I don't know. I guess like I'm thinking Victorian eras, they didn't talk. Everything was hush hush, right? We didn't talk about this kind of stuff, and just babies suddenly appeared. And so now, I mean, I feel like people are like, maybe it's been because we've just been carried down, and now people are wanting to be more open about it and in talking about it in a physiological, biological sense.
Well, and I think there genuinely are more problems because of our lifestyle in these modern times. I mean, certainly more sedentary, more sitting, our diets are not always the best.
Okay, that's very good points. Very good point.
Yeah.
So let's go back to talking to our daughters, teaching our daughters some practical skills so that we can set her up for a lifetime of functional pelvic floor health, so that hopefully she doesn't run into a lot of these issues. So can you talk a little bit about optimal bowel movements and urination, something that she would be experiencing right now that we can talk to her about?
Yeah, so I'm going to give some practical tips here. I think hydration and fiber do not get enough credit. Like, fiber is a superfood, does so many great things for our health. But when it comes to potty habits specifically, it makes a tremendous difference with the consistency of our stool. And so simple things like adding electrolytes. We like a brand called Highlights. It's no sugar. It's a concentrate. You can just add 10 drops to each glass of water that you drink. And then fiber, something like milled chia and flaxseed that you can add to a smoothie or oatmeal, or if you bake your own muffins or something like this, like just putting it in the food that your kids are getting. Because, I mean, out of my 2, up until maybe their sophomore year of high school, were adamant no vegetables, so I was always having to blend and hide things for their own health benefits. So that would be my number one recommendation, because statistically speaking, girls struggle with constipation more than boys when they're in public restrooms. And this is more, I think, for girls who are going to school and not being homeschooled, but put in that environment where there's stalls, they're embarrassed, for so many different reasons. And so a lot of young girls struggle with constipation. So this can really help with that. Along with that tip goes with, get your family a squatty potty, please. Toileting stools are so important for both bowel and bladder habits. We'll talk about bladder habits in a minute, but putting ourselves in the proper position, which is knees higher than hips, helps the pelvic floor relax, and it reduces the amount of straining on the pelvic floor, which again, over time compounds and can create more problems post-pregnancy. So we want to get a handle on that by, just putting that squatty potty there. And there's a lot of cute ones now. They used to just sell the white plastic ones, but now I have a really cute bamboo one. They have teak ones. So there's all kinds and there's really cute kid ones now too. So you have a bunch of different options there. In terms of the bladder habits, and this is something that I think, girls are busybodies, right? Well, boys are too, but they tend to push their pee out. They're in the middle of doing something with their friends and they finally decide they're going to stop and use the restroom. They hurry up and push their pee out. This creates urine retention. Okay. So that means that there's a nerve connection there that when you start pushing your pee out, you're not able to fully empty your bladder. And therefore, that can create UTIs in the future because you're retaining that urine. Bacteria is sitting there longer. It sets the perfect stage for UTIs. And if girls kind of get in this habitual habit of pushing their pee out and you've been dealing with chronic UTIs, this could be a big piece of that. We talked about pushing your pee out, but also girls have a bad habit of holding their pee in for too long. We don't want to do that either. And I know it can be like, especially I'm thinking of my 5th grader and like, busy with games or chatting with a friend or doing something and not wanting to stop what they're doing to use the restroom. But we really don't want to be holding our pee in for longer than we really have to. That can create more problems with urine retention and UTIs like we just talked about. So what are some other action steps would be to make sure that your girls are wiping properly. I'm sure you talked to them about this, front to back instead of back to front. Taking a good probiotic to make sure that their gut bacteria remains healthy, that is going to help with their bowel movements and obviously overall general health and wellness. And then the last thing that I want to say is wearing compressive garments. So when Christina and I were collecting data for our research study that we published in 2 different journals, one of the things that came up was the impact of compressive garments on the pelvic floor. So your daughters might be wearing tights for dancing or those athletic or gym shorts, those compressive pants. And all of those things, as women, I talk about Spanx, and it's like the pressure has to go somewhere. So if they're wearing those compressive garments, it's displacing pressure downward on the pelvic floor. So it's the same as sitting on a toilet and straining. Collectively over time, this has negative impacts on our pelvic floor and can set you up for things like prolapse in the future.
Well, there is a lot to unpack there. I'm over here scribbling some notes. So let's go back. So you're talking about fiber and drinking enough water. And so adding things into their food. Is there other things besides maybe like putting in chia or flax seeds or vegetables or other ways of getting some good fiber? I'm asking for myself here too.
Yeah, an apple a day is great as well. Apples have a lot of soluble fiber in them. And making sure, if they're eating a good amount, 3 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, then they should be good. But a lot of our kids are not.
Right. Okay. Those are good. I can add an apple, and I think that's an easy one to be able to add, especially, fruits. And as we get here to warmer weather and there's more of a more selection of fresh fruits and stuff.
Well, and I do want to clarify, a lot of moms make purees and smoothies and things, and that's great. But we need the fiber. So if they're not chewing and swallowing it, if it's being grinded up for them in some kind of other way, I wouldn't count that as them receiving the fiber, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So does that mean it just kind of passes through you faster? Because
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That does make sense. And then you talked about girls more often than boys being constipated. So I'm going to totally out myself here. And that was an issue for me. I remember many years, even up through high school, and just, the stress of having to go to the bathroom at school and then you're holding it because you're too embarrassed at school to do that. And we're going on trips, whether it was with school or a youth group, and coming home because you're eating trash while you're gone too. And then coming home and being but it was a regular thing. So I feel a little, a little like, okay, it wasn't just me. It was probably my friends too. And we just didn't talk about it.
Well, and another thing I should mention is sliding up one of those dried prunes. You could slide that into a lunchbox or have that for a snack. That makes a difference too. But still as women, I think when we go travel on vacation or whatnot, it can be, because there's so many things that are changing, it can be hard to not get constipated, especially if you're flying somewhere. That automatically causes dehydration in the body, which has an impact on gut motility.
That all makes perfect sense. Okay, so talk about the squatty potty. So it's a legit thing. And does it have to be a squatty potty? Can you just if you have a stool, say you have younger kids and you have a stool for them to climb up to the sink in order to wash their hands, can you use that same stool, or does it have to be a certain height, or what are we looking for?
Yeah, great question. So you want the knees higher than the hips. Okay, so that's important. And you also want the feet hip width apart. So if they're too close, the pelvic floor can't relax. So, I always say, good, better, best, right? Like a stool that they would push up to wash their hands, the little square ones, that's good. A better option would be perhaps we have some on Instagram. I do a homemade squatty potty when I travel. So it's literally 2 Chinese takeout containers that I use when I travel, because I'm not going to, even the travel squatty potties are crazy, to pack that in your suitcase. So it could be something like that to test it out. If you don't want to invest right now, grab 2 empty yogurt containers or Chinese takeout containers, turn them over and have your child place each foot on one where their feet are hip width apart, and see if that helps them easier evacuate their bowels along with the hydration and fiber.
Okay, good. So now we can try it out kind of thing. And I've even seen, I don't know how good it is. I've even seen them at like Aldi squatty potties, like a knockoff of squatty potties or something like that. So you can find them in a lot of places.
Yeah. There are lots of toileting stools out there.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good term. Toileting stools. There we go. I remember the original one, and you could only get that one. And I guess there's been some other ones made ever since then. But then you're talking about the opposite ends of the spectrum of like forcing your urine out, but then also holding it in too long. So let's go back to the forcing it out and the talking about how that can lead to urinary tract infections. And I guess that can be a common thing. I've not run into that in my own life or with my daughter or anything, or anybody close to me. So that can be a common thing with girls.
It can be a common thing with girls, especially as they're starting their periods and they have a lot of different things going on down there. One of the things that I recommend and have used myself, because after having my second child, I dealt with these chronic UTIs, is doing a sitz bath. Excuse me. So if your daughter, if you know that she is struggling with UTI, something as simple as just putting a couple of inches of water in the bathtub, warm water, about a cup of Epsom salt, let that dissolve, and then just have her sit in there for a couple of minutes. That's going to help irrigate the area. It's going to help kill bacteria. You could also use a peri-wash bottle, like a little homemade bidet, if you will, with this if they're really struggling with chronic UTIs. The other simple thing is like cotton panties. Like make sure you're wearing breathable underwear, because wearing, the silk panties and all this that they want to start wearing in middle school can also cause problems because you're retaining moisture there. And as you're approaching puberty, the microbiome in your vagina is also changing. And so those are some simple things that you can do to help with the UTIs, along with, taking a cranberry supplement like a Manos D. Obviously check with your healthcare provider on dosages for that, but that's another great thing proactively that can kind of help break that cycle. And I would say, even if your daughter isn't dealing with UTIs, teach them about the symptoms of what that would feel like. So if they notice, oh my goodness, like, Mom, this is really weird. I feel like I'm going to the bathroom like 15 times a day now. Like I have to go way more. Or they notice that burning, or they start noticing lower back pain and fatigue, because sometimes, depending on the bacteria that is initiating this infection, it can go quickly from the bladder into the kidneys, which then really can impact, obviously causing fatigue and pain and possibly fever.
Those are some good things to look for. I mean, not that they're good to have, but that it's good to say, hey, if you have these certain issues, again, that goes back to the beginning of our conversation of talking to your daughter and her not being afraid to come and approach you about this and to ask about you being the first one. And I remember when my kids were younger, it seemed like there was always somebody with something that, this and that, but it's good for them to know that they can come to Mom. I even now have, my older kids like, oh, they'll mention something and I'm like, okay. And then it's in the back of my mind and I'll pray about it and think about, and I'll give them some solutions. And then a day or two, it's gone. But with a UTI, it's something that it's good for them to know what the symptoms are and not just think, oh, this is just normal. It's something normal for now, because I'm sure that if left untreated, it can get even worse.
Yes. And the thing with UTIs is the more frequently that you get them, the less symptoms that you have. And it can really become this nasty feedback loop, especially if your daughter ends up getting put on antibiotics that destroys all the gut bacteria, and it can really get out of hand very quickly in terms of becoming a real health issue for your daughter.
Yes, and the goal here is to set them up for good health and good pelvic floor health for further down the road. And so the last thing that you mentioned there, I want to make sure we touch on, and I do have one more question for you here, is the tight clothing. And then when you were mentioning about wearing cotton underwear so that you can breathe, I'm thinking swimsuit season. I remember saying to my daughter, don't just sit, I mean, there's going to be time we're there, but get out of the pool, dry off some, and don't come home and stay in your bathing suit for the rest of the day.
Yes. Staying in a wet swimsuit, especially if your daughter is already prone to this, can definitely set them up for a UTI.
Yeah. And the tight clothing, the leggings, I'm thinking, and that kind of stuff. And I know hopefully our daughters are not wearing Spanx, but I remember I've given up on those. I'm like, whatever, we're just going to let it hang out because, you wear those as an adult woman because maybe you're going to something fancy for your husband's work and you want to look good in that dress. And I remember feeling terrible at the end of the day. Or the end of the evening. I couldn't really eat. Like I felt like it was affecting my breathing, like everything was being pushed up too. And I would come home with just feeling really crummy.
Yes.
So no to the Spanx.
No, it's terrible. There are definitely downstream negative consequences to them.
Yep. So let's go into one last question here. We're going to talk about Kegels. Is that I say it right? Kegels, right? Okay. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while.
People say it two ways, Kegels or Kegels. And
okay. I think I was taught Kegels. Accepted. Okay. So you are strongly against Kegels for our daughters. Can you tell us why? And maybe start off with a definition of what a Kegel is, just in case someone isn't familiar with it.
Yeah. So a Kegel is really just an isometric contraction of the vaginal opening, essentially. And, we know better, we do better. I myself was a Kegel queen after my first delivery 21 years ago, because that was the only solution that was provided. And we know better now, right? I talked about functionally training your pelvic floor. And the reason why we're against Kegels is because a Kegel, that isometric contraction, only strengthens that one sphincter muscle in the one position that you're holding it. And the thing about our pelvic floors is that they are not working in isolation. Our pelvic floor works in conjunction with our respiratory diaphragm, our deep abdominals, our back extensors, our hip rotators, and our glutes. So we don't want to start working muscles in isolation that are meant to come on board and work together, coordinate with other muscle groups. Secondly, people have great intentions with telling you to do Kegels. And let's say you are incontinent like I was. I had birth injuries after my first delivery, was incontinent both ways. I needed something to spark the actual muscle contraction and make it happen. So for a very short window of time, that was incredibly beneficial to me because it was like I had to go to the bathroom and then there it was, right? But that's a Band-Aid solution. It's not a great long-term strategy because what can happen is when you're working that muscle in isolation, it can become over tight. And then that sets you up for a whole array of other issues. And it can be harder to undo. So that would be why we don't recommend Kegels, because there's a better way now. And you know better and you do better.
I appreciate that because, that's what I'm kind of like too. I've even said to my kids, I'm sorry I kind of pushed this. I know better now about this and presenting them with information. But I remember having kids. So the last one would have been 17 years ago. You go to the doctor after 6 weeks and they're just, or maybe even before that, I don't remember. It's been so long. That's what they tell you to go ahead and do. And I was the worst at it. So maybe actually it worked out for me because I would never remember to do it.
I mean, it was the solution that was provided. But I did want to say one other thing, because I think this is the part of my story. What are some other contributing factors that can lead to prolapse down the road when you're younger that many, young women, moms don't teach their daughters? And this is, for me, I was diagnosed with asthma at a very young age. So if your child has asthma or a chronic coughing condition or chronic allergies where certain times of the year they're sneezing, this is a lot of downward pressure on your pelvic floor and can make your pelvic floor weaker. The other things would be like high impact sports. So I danced from a very young age all the way through high school, but cheerleading, statistically speaking, cheerleaders have higher incidences, like teenage and middle school cheerleaders, of pelvic floor dysfunction, which is P leaks, P frequency, P urgency, low back pain, hip tightness. They statistically have higher levels of this at a younger age because they're not training their pelvic floor functionally. Other things would be any kind of hypermobility disorders or connective tissue disorders that can set you up for progressed pelvic floor issues down the road.
Okay, those are good things to think of, because we can often think, oftentimes you maybe go to the doctor and things are very isolated, but we really have to look at everything fully. So think about I remember we were talking earlier, after having kids, crossing my legs to sneeze and all of, so we know as moms that it's related. We know when we go to cough, or we have a coughing fit, or you get sick, and then afterwards that cough that lasts forever. And I feel like my pelvic floor we were talking earlier, has done really well. But I mean, you give me a 3-week cough and we're going to be done. It's very, very related. And I'm sad to hear, of girls that are of that age that are experiencing these issues. But I'm glad that there's a solution. So can you tell us a bit about Tighten Your Tinkler? What do you offer? How can you help moms who are experiencing some issues? Because I'm sure there's some listeners going, oh, yes, that's me. How can they connect more with you?
Yeah, the first thing that we always recommend is, if you suspect that you're dealing with any of the issues that we talked about today, head over and take our 5-minute quiz. That's a great place to start. It's based off of the research that we collected in our research study, and it really helps you know where you fall in terms of severity of symptoms. There's 3 different groups: green, gold, and red. And we'll give you next steps based off of the zone that you fall into. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, we have a great and very robust free resource page, because Christina and myself, are very, very passionate about teaching women what is happening in their body, what are proactive steps that they can start taking today to start to feel better and feel like they can get a handle or get their hands around some of these issues, because so many of these do impact our quality of life. And you can find that the resource page on our website, as well as links to our research. That's also there on our website, tightenyourtinkler.com. The last place I would say, 2 more, would be our YouTube channel. We have over 100 teaching videos on just about every topic that you can think of, about types of P leaks and over tight pelvic floors and the anatomy and all of these different things. And you can find us, Tighten Your Tinkler, on YouTube. And then we don't take ourselves very seriously, as you can tell with our name, even though we are qualified to talk about these things. And we have a lot of fun over on Instagram. So that's tighten.your.tinkler, and they can find us over there as well.
It's a catchy name, and it tells you, I told you, it's a good name. It catches, and you're like, oh, I know exactly what they are going to do and how they are going to help me. So yes, go over and take that quiz. I took the quiz. It does not take very long, and will give you a clear answer. And you probably already kind of know. I feel like we know, like you're saying, it does affect the quality of your life, instead of being like, oh, am I going to laugh or cough or there's a lot of issues. And in that quiz also, what made me aware that there was a lot of other symptoms that maybe you wouldn't really think are related. And I think that's important. And I think that's what's important to you guys too.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can head over that, and you guys do offer a course or a program. Is that correct?
We do. It's a program, and you can use your HSA or FSA card if you have one of those. It does qualify for that. And we are happy to offer your listeners a special coupon code for $50 off of the signature program. It is LITTLE, LITTLE 50 for $50 off.
Perfect. So we will include those links in the show notes. Go ahead and use that coupon code. And I love that you accept like HSA and that kind of stuff. That really, because that's what we pay a lot of our stuff with. And so that's a blessing. So thank you. But yes, thank you today for being here today, Jenn, kind of helping us as moms to empower our daughters, but also then this aspect of how you can help us as well as moms.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Lee. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes, and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.